Back in 2001, the Bayer company withdrew its statin product from the market. Let's see if we can learn some lessons from this incident. Stay tuned. For context, let's take a look at what statins were actually on the market at the time. As you can see here, there were 6 of them at the time that Cerivastatin came out, and that is the Bayer product called Baycol or Lipobay, and that's the one that we're going to be looking at today. And in case you're wondering, Rosuvastatin, also known as Crestor, and Pitavastatin, known as Levalo, have actually come out since then. So let's take a brief look at the history of this issue between the years of 1997 and 2001. It's based on this paper, Potential for Conflict of Interest in the Evaluation of Suspected Adverse Drug Reactions. In June 1997, there was a new drug application for this Cerivastatin product, which is a lipid-lowering agent, and they got approval for the 0.2 milligram and the 0.3 milligram doses. In 1998, in February, they did the press release that launches this Baycol product. By July, they had added a warning about rhabdomyolysis to the label, to the insert that came with the medicine. And the next month, they updated the NDA to include the 0.4 milligram dose. By April 1999, there was a publication of a case study of a rhabdomyolysis that was linked to the use of this product, Cerivastatin, when it was used concurrently with a fibrate. Fibrates are just another class of cholesterol-lowering drugs, not as effective as statins for cholesterol lowering, but sometimes they are actually co-prescribed. In May of that year, the NDA for the 400 microgram dose was approved, and in September they amended the NDA again to see if they could get approval for the 0.8 milligram dose. Finally, in December, the label was updated again to indicate a contraindication of using Cerivastatin with this fibrate. And in July of 2000, the NDA was approved for that 800 microgram dose. In 2001, there was another label update indicating that doctors should only start people at the 0.4 milligram dose. And then in August of 2001, the product was withdrawn from the US market. So looking at this, we really don't see anything unusual going on. They released a product, they issued a couple warnings as they learned things about it. Why the withdrawal? What we need to do is look at what was going on behind the scenes that only the company knew about. We see that in May of 1998, only 100 days after the product's launch, there were 6 cases of rhabdomyolysis associated with this Cerivastatin. 5 of them had to do with the concurrent use of the fibrate. So whereas we may have looked ahead to 1999 and say, well, they found out about the rhabdomyolysis cases, especially as it pertains to the co-use of the fibrate, in April of 99, and they got the warning out by December. That's actually, unfortunately, kind of reasonable because it takes time to be sure that there's really a connection. But we see here, they actually knew about this a year and a half before, but they did get the rhabdomyolysis warning out pretty quickly, but the problem of the co-use or the co-prescription of the fibrate wasn't brought to anybody's attention. In July of 99, the company was already running tests of the 1.6 milligram dose. So you see that they went from a 0.2 milligram dose to a 0.3, to a 0.4, to a 0.8. So they keep on doubling it because they found that the LDL lowering capability of this statin could not match what was on the market at the time. So they want to keep on getting approval for higher and higher doses. They found that when they tested the 1.6 milligram dose, that 1/8 of the people were getting elevated CK, that's creatine kinase, and the elevated levels went up to 10 times the upper limit of normal. That's what ULN is. An elevation of this amount, along with symptoms, is what gets diagnosed as rhabdomyolysis. So in August of 1999, there was an internal committee meeting and they looked at the results. They decided to not publish these trial results from this 1.6 milligram dose. If we were being charitable, we might say, well, they looked at it and said, there's no point in publishing this. It would be irresponsible of us to pursue this option. That's being charitable. If we want to be conspiratorial in our thinking, we might say that there was bad results from this and they wanted to hide it. After all, they had an NDA being submitted the very next month for at least half that dose, so that if a report was released showing how bad the 1.6 milligram dose, that might actually draw some attention too much to the 0.8 milligram dose application. And then in October, they had an internal communications, emails amongst their scientists, that 60% of the rhabdomyolysis cases are from use with the fibrate. That is actually 855 times the relative reporting rate of atorvastatin or Lipitor under the same conditions. In other words, with the co-prescription of fibrates. So you can see that that label update came out shortly after that. It wasn't actually very effective. It didn't change the co-prescription of the fibrates with the Cerivastatin very much at all. The statistics that have come out show there really wasn't much of an impact. It appears that doctors really don't look closely at these inserts or these announcements because they kept on co-prescribing Gemfibrozil along with the Cerivastatin. So in March of 2000, their scientists confirmed that Cerivastatin monotherapy, in other words, just the Baycol without the fibrates, still had a rhabdomyolysis risk that was 10 times that of the other statins. Yet they're still going on ahead and applying for higher and higher doses for approval. Finally, in June of 2001, there was an internal report on the observational studies of the Cerivastatin interaction with the fibrate. And finally, they were forced by circumstances in August to withdraw from the market. So let's look at some of the final statistics that come out of this. First of all, we're dealing with very small numbers, so you have to be a little cautious in assuming that it was the drug that actually caused the problem. But these are kind of overwhelming despite the small numbers. 31 out of 73 statin-related deaths from rhabdomyolysis in this time period were from their 2% market share. So that was 16 times the next worst statin, which was lovastatin, and it was 36 times the rate compared to all other statins. When co-prescribed with fibrates, 4 out of 5 rhabdomyolysis cases were from this 2% market share. So it's looking pretty bad for the Cerivastatin. It does turn out to be kind of a dangerous drug. And when it was not co-prescribed with fibrates, it was associated still with 35% of all of the cases. Now, we're not talking about deaths in this case, we're just talking about all cases. And overall, Cerivastatin was associated with 50% of all rhabdomyolysis cases, again, with a 2% market share. So you can see that that's 25 times as much as you would expect. Finally, as I mentioned before, when compared to Lipitor, the case rate when co-prescribed with the fibrate was 855 times higher for Cerivastatin. So what are the lessons we can get from this? Well, here's some quotes from that paper. First one, when a drug is approved, there's a number of unknown issues, and that is the occurrence of rare but serious adverse drug events, and that's what rhabdomyolysis is. It's a classic rare but serious side effect. Interactions with other drugs. That's exactly what we're talking about with the fibrates. Late events, in other words, events that show up after some time and after the discontinuation. And of course, the effects on pregnancy. Pregnant women shouldn't be prescribed statins at all. And this was a very telling statement. Regulatory approval for clinical use does not and cannot guarantee safety. It's on us to make sure that if we are going to take a drug, that we know that it's been on the market long enough for its safety profile to be truly known. Next one, this quote, in contrast to the highly structured pre-marketing evaluation, post-marketing surveillance has little structure, and the regulatory process creates an evidence-free zone at the time of the launch. Pharmaceutical companies, they do promise that they're going to actually do these post-marketing studies, but in practice, like it says here, half of them never get started. Another quote, although often incomplete and inferior in quality to data from clinical trials, their suspected adverse drug reactions, this is a database where these things are reported, are sometimes the only source of the post-marketing adverse event information. It's dependent on things being properly reported. As I've talked about in other videos, when I was having problems on statins, it wasn't rhabdomyolysis, it was other adverse effects. My doctor wasn't reporting it because people weren't reporting that. Well, that's self-fulfilling. So that's why the adverse drug reaction data is going to be kind of considered a minimum of the adverse effects. During that study of the 1.6 milligram Cerivastatin, which they never ended up submitting an NDA for, the company scientists didn't believe that they should proceed with working on that because of the high incidence of the severe CK elevation. Further, there was a high incidence of what they called minor creatine kinase elevations. About 50% of all users had that at this dosage level. And that led them to conclude that there was actually an exponential increase of side effects when they went from 0.8 to 1.6 milligrams. That's going to actually be important in a moment. We're going to come back to this. The large percentage of patients experienced CK elevations led to a consensus by the company's committee not to publish the results of the study. I think it was an ethical lapse. I think most of my viewers would agree. hey, this was important information for people to know who are going to use cerivastatin at any dose. The cerivastatin concentration was actually increased when it was co-prescribed with this fibrate by an average of 559%, so that the effect of the interaction would be to increase a 0.3 milligram dose of cerivastatin to an effective dose of 1.7 milligrams, which is already over the 1.6 milligrams, which was causing all sorts of problems here in their internal studies, enough for them to actually decide not to pursue it. Can you imagine if somebody were on a 0.4 milligram or a 0.8 milligram dose and were co-prescribed fibrate? You're warned for a lot of statins, do not drink grapefruit juice along with the statin. The same thing happens there. It actually interferes, just like the fibrate seems to, with some process in your body that inhibits a little bit the concentration of the statin. It's like taking an overdose. If it happens once, maybe not a problem. But if you're doing it constantly, it's going to lead to problems. Well, in the case of the fibrates, what's happening? Well, a person is doing it constantly because they've been prescribed these two different things. So they were getting a massive overdose, in effect, of the cerivastatin, to the point that it was at these levels that were extremely dangerous. In this article, they say that the development of new drugs is an enormous undertaking that involves thousands of people, millions of dollars, and the pharmaceutical industry might have a high threshold for taking action. A polite way of putting it, when so much is on the line, they're going to be very cautious about withdrawing a drug from the market because all the economic value being lost, and the people who worked on it have kind of an emotional interest in hoping things are safe and keeping them going. As they go on to say here, pharmaceutical companies have a complex and almost insurmountable conflict of interest. A subjective element is present in an effort to infer whether or not the occurrence of the outcomes in users of a particular drug was actually the consequence of the use of that drug. Because it's possible to get rhabdomyolysis and not be caused by the use of drugs. Rhabdomyolysis didn't just come along when statins came along. It's actually an existing condition. If you over-exercise, go out and run a marathon when that's not something you're accustomed to do, that can happen. So as they go on to say, for pharmaceutical companies, this appraisal may be influenced both by economic considerations and in the emotional investment of those involved in the development process. So my closing thoughts on this. First, this cerivastatin affair highlights how hard it is to recognize and implement corrective action when it comes to adverse drug reaction. Cognitive effects, those are actually subjective as far as your analysis of it happening. You have to report to your doctor, and your doctor either believes you or doesn't, and they will report it or they won't. There are lots of YouTube videos out there where doctors insist that there is no such thing as a cognitive effect from a statin. Many of my viewers know that that's not the case. Many of my viewers maybe don't have the cognitive effects, but many of them do. Many of us do. So it's a systemic problem. You can't pin it exclusively on the pharmaceutical companies. The mechanisms set up for capturing this data and analyzing it are really kind of inadequate to the task. If doctors don't believe that statin has caused an adverse effect that you're reporting, they won't necessarily report it. All pharmaceuticals require time on the market to establish a safety profile. We have to do our due diligence as patients. We have to ask our doctor, okay, you're recommending that, it doesn't matter what drug it is. It could be a statin, it could be anything else. It could be because we saw a dancing lady on a commercial on TV singing about something. We have to make sure these drugs have been on the market for sufficient time to actually know what its safety profile is, and we actually have to take out the fine print and read the drug packaging insert. Think of the case, despite the warning, doctors continued at the same rate to co-prescribe cerivastatin along with the fibrates. That was really on the doctor to protect the patient against that. It's going to have to be up to we as patients to ensure that that actually happens and that we can look at those and question them. And if the doctor poo-poos to say, yeah, but that's not really, that's very rare. No, you have to go online to the FDA website and see exactly why that warning is there. As an example, though my doctor wouldn't report that I had cognitive problems with the statins, a later doctor, the doctor who I actually moved over to, told me, oh, that's an FDA warning, so this is a real thing. And finally, there's a government component to the problem here, and we have to look at the restrictions on how user fees may be spent by the FDA. Now, a user fee is paid by the pharmaceutical companies to the FDA when they make their application for a new drug approval. It's to help hire the necessary staff to go over the data and to approve or disapprove drugs in a reasonable amount of time. Back in the 1990s, when the cerivastatin problem came up, the 1992 User Fee Act in the United States and its reauthorization in 1997 actually prohibited the agency from spending user fees on post-marketing surveillance or other drug safety programs. They could only use it for evaluating the NDA. I wonder if there were some lobbyists in the United States from the pharmaceutical companies that got that little little clause in there. I went to the FDA website, and now they have this statement that the FDA is required by law to spend user fee funds only on specified activities. It does say that post-market safety activities are part of the specified activities. Whether that's just a change in the interpretation of the law or whether the law was amended in the meantime, I haven't found out yet, but at least there's some hope there. So that's what I've got on the Cerivastatin episode. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this topics or others you'd like me to cover. And if you haven't seen this video, I recommend you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.